Welcome back. How long have you been watching my channel? Let me know below.
Some people just don't have it, my mother said as she handed me the dessert plates. Her words floating out so casually you'd think she was commenting on the weather and not chiseling into my chest with the usual surgical precision. I kept smiling as I handed her the pie server, nodding like a trained hostess, the kind that keeps the room feeling warm while quietly bleeding out beneath the napkin linens. I didn't flinch. I never do anymore. It's funny what you learn to mask when you've spent your entire life being second best in a race you didn't sign up for. The pie I brought, made from scratch with a lattice crust and all, sat untouched while Jenna's store-bought cake was showered with praise. It's the thought that counts, Mom had said earlier while still chewing Jenna's last bite. That night, I loaded the dishwasher while Jenna sat on the couch like royalty, scrolling through her phone and occasionally throwing in a comment about her latest work trip to New York. Mom kept nodding like a bobblehead. Every sentence that left Jenna's mouth was met with awe, while anything I said died somewhere mid-air like a deflated balloon. When I mentioned a promotion I'd quietly earned, Mom responded with, "That's great, honey," but her voice had already wandered off. Not even fake interest, just pure dismissal. So well practiced it might as well be instinct by now. I didn't argue. I never do, that's the game, and I've played it long enough to know I'll never win. Not by their rules. It wasn't always like this, or maybe it was, and I was just too young to notice. Growing up, Jenna was the star, the honor roll student, the homecoming queen, the one who made Mom beam at every parent-teacher night. I remember once in 6th grade, I came home beaming because I'd finally won something. A silly art contest, nothing huge, but it was mine. I held that ribbon up like a trophy. Mom barely looked at it before asking if I wanted to help her clean up the kitchen. "I'm proud of you," she said absently, like she was reading from a script she barely believed in. The ribbon eventually got tossed, probably in one of the drawers, never to be seen again. So when she said it again, "Some people just don't have it," I knew exactly what she meant. She wasn't being cruel, not intentionally. That was the worst part. She believed it was truth, and she told herself that truth so many times it had calcified into her reality. And I was expected to agree with it, nod quietly, and fade into the backdrop like a helpful stagehand while Jenna stood in the spotlight. But this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the room felt just a little too quiet after she said it. Or maybe I'd finally reached that strange age where dignity starts to outweigh desire for approval. I cleaned the kitchen, polished every dish, even wrapped the leftovers, all while smiling like I was auditioning for sainthood. I went home, curled into bed, and read a book like none of it touched me. It's strange how numbness becomes your armor. You stop expecting the pain to stop. And instead, you just get good at pretending it doesn't matter. The next morning, as I poured coffee and tried to focus on my day, my phone lit up. Jenna's name in all caps. "What did you say to Mom? She's been sobbing for hours." For a second, I genuinely thought she meant someone else. My mom? Sobbing because of me? I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't said anything remotely cruel. All I did was serve dessert, clean the dishes, and leave with the same practiced smile I've worn since childhood. And yet there it was, Jenna's furious message like a flare gun shot across my morning. I stared at the screen for a long minute, trying to retrace every word I'd said. Did I let something slip? A sarcastic comment? A passive dig? No, I'd been careful, measured, composed. Too composed. Maybe that was it. Maybe I didn't give her the reaction she expected. Maybe it was my silence that shook her. The thing about my mom is that she thrives on contrast. Jenna's shine next to my shadow. It gives her meaning. Maybe last night, for the first time, she saw something she didn't expect in me. Not defiance, but indifference. Maybe she realized I didn't need her validation anymore. And for someone like her, that might be the cruelest thing I've ever done. The phone buzzed again, Jenna calling this time. I didn't pick up. I stood there, coffee cooling in my hands, listening to it ring while my mind raced through all the silent things I've never said. The things I held in because I wanted peace, not war. But peace, I'm starting to think, was never real. It was just the quiet part before someone finally noticed I'd stopped fighting. As the call ended and the screen dimmed, I looked out the window and wondered if this was the beginning of something new, or the fallout from something long overdue. Either way, I wasn't sorry, not yet. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from running marathons or staying up all night, but from spending your entire life tiptoeing around the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, careful not to crack the veneer of the fragile dynamics that everyone insists are fine, as long as you keep smiling and don't ask too many questions. After Jenna's message, I spent the rest of that morning in a kind of mental fog. One of those days where everything happens in the background, emails get answered, errands get run. But you're not really present, just going through the motions while your mind replays the same scene on a loop, over and over, trying to locate the moment the bomb was planted, even if you didn't mean to light the fuse. I hadn't responded to Jenna yet. I didn't really know what to say because, in truth, I hadn't said anything at all, but I could feel the shift. Like the ground had moved a few inches under my feet, and no one else noticed except for the people who were starting to fall through the cracks. My phone buzzed a few more times that afternoon. Jenna again, alternating between demanding and panicked, as though she couldn't decide if she wanted me to fix it or admit I'd broken something on purpose. Eventually, I turned it face down and shoved it in the drawer. I needed air. I texted my best friend Alex and asked if she wanted to grab coffee, which was our code for I need to talk without crying in my car alone. Alex had known me since college, and while she'd never met my family outside of brief holiday drop-ins, she knew the pattern. She'd seen it unfold in real time, in the way my voice would flatten whenever I spoke about Mom, in the way I always changed the subject when someone praised me too much, like it made my skin crawl. She knew I'd never raised my voice in a family argument because that would have been admitting I wanted something I didn't believe I was allowed to have. We met at this little coffee place that always smells like cinnamon and burnt espresso, and as soon as I sat down, Alex gave me that look she has, the one that says she already knows I'm unraveling, but she's going to wait until I hand her the thread myself. So I did. I told her about the dinner, the comment, the pie, the silence. I told her about the message Jenna sent, about the sobbing. I kept my voice steady until I got to the part where I said I didn't feel anything. That was the truth that scared me the most. I wasn't angry or hurt, not in the usual way. I was tired. Tired enough that the whole thing felt like watching a bad play I'd seen 100 times, except now I was sitting in the back row with popcorn, just waiting for the curtain to fall. Alex didn't say anything right away, just took a slow sip from her mug and leaned in like she was choosing her words carefully. Then she said something that stuck with me. Maybe she's not crying because of what you said. Maybe she's crying because you didn't need her to notice anymore. That one hit like a gut punch, and I had to look away because suddenly the edges of my vision went a little blurry. She was right, and that terrified me. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I sat at my kitchen table with an old notebook and started writing. Not poetry, not a journal, just thoughts. Things I'd wanted to say to my mom for years, but never did. Little things like how it felt to watch her beam at Jenna's piano recital while I sat in the audience with a spelling bee medal in my lap. Bigger things like how I stopped bringing home achievements after a while because I got tired of pretending they mattered. The words poured out of me, slow at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. I wrote until the pen ran out of ink and my hand cramped up. And somewhere around 3 a.m, I realized I didn't want to confront her. I didn't want to yell or accuse or demand anything. I wanted to prove, quietly and thoroughly, that I didn't need to play by her rules anymore. I would be the daughter who didn't perform for applause. I would be kind, composed, respectful, but just detached enough that she'd start to wonder where she lost me and whether it was something she could undo. So the next day, I stopped by her house unannounced. I brought her favorite tea, the one Jenna always forgets she likes. I sat in the living room and asked her about her day, really listened. I didn't mention Jenna or the dinner or the crying. I just gave her space to talk, and every now and then I'd offer a small, understanding smile, the kind of smile you give someone when you're in control and they don't know it yet. When I left, she hugged me a little tighter than usual. Her eyes were glassy, and I think she almost said something. An apology, maybe, but I didn't give her the chance. I told her I had a meeting, kissed her on the cheek, and walked out like nothing was different. But everything was. The next week, I started sending her little messages. Nothing dramatic, just thoughtful reminders of good memories from childhood. I found an old photo of me holding her hand at the zoo and sent it with the caption, "I always felt safe with you." And then I sent one of Jenna with a caption too. "She always looked up to you." It wasn't a lie, just a carefully positioned truth. Something to make her think. I didn't need her to believe I was the better daughter. I just needed her to stop believing I was invisible. By the time Jenna called again, furious and confused, saying Mom had been unusually quiet and emotional for days, I just said I didn't know what she was talking about and hung up. I'd done nothing wrong. I'd simply reminded Mom that I exist. And sometimes, that's the most unsettling thing you can do to someone who's spent their whole life pretending you don't. There's a strange satisfaction that settles in when you realize you've been underestimated for so long that no one even thinks to look your way when things start to shift. As though you're simply part of the furniture, a neutral background figure in someone else's grand narrative, quietly dusted and ignored until the day you stop standing still and someone finally notices the space you used to occupy is now empty. And that, somehow, in your absence, the room feels colder. After I hung up on Jenna that last time, I sat there at the edge of my kitchen table, watching my tea go cold, thinking about how easy it is to become invisible and how much power you gain when you finally learn how to use that invisibility to your advantage instead of constantly fighting against it. I knew I couldn't confront Jenna directly because she thrives on conflict. It fuels her, gives her purpose, and every battle we've ever had ended with her emerging victorious, simply because I never had the stomach to fight as dirty or loud as she did. But what Jenna didn't know, what no one in our family ever took the time to learn, was that quiet doesn't mean weak. Sometimes quiet means waiting, observing, and planning 10 moves ahead while everyone else is still talking about the last game. So I waited and I watched, and I decided that if I couldn't win in volume or visibility, I'd win in precision. It started small, with another visit to Mom's. I showed up on a Wednesday, midday, with a bouquet of her favorite flowers, not the usual carnations Jenna brings from the grocery store, but the wild tulips she used to grow in the garden when we were kids, the ones she cried over when they stopped blooming after Dad left. I told her I saw them at a little flower shop downtown and couldn't resist. She smiled in a way I hadn't seen in years, nostalgic, soft around the edges, and just a little embarrassed, like someone who's been caught remembering something they weren't supposed to admit mattered. We sat on the porch drinking tea, and I asked her about the garden, about why she never replanted the tulips, and she said something about it never feeling the same. I nodded, pretended I understood, and said, "Maybe it's time for something to feel different." I left the flowers on the windowsill and went home without mentioning Jenna once. The next day, Mom texted me a photo of the tulips in a vase and said, "These made me smile." It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a seed, and I knew exactly how to water it. That weekend, I invited them both, Mom and Jenna, for dinner at my place. I told them I wanted to do something special, something just for the three of us, like old times. Jenna agreed, of course, eager to perform her usual social sparkle, and Mom sounded touched, maybe even hopeful. I planned everything meticulously, down to the music playing in the background and the wine pairings. But the centerpiece was the dessert, a chocolate cake Jenna had loved since childhood, the one Mom used to bake for her birthday every year like it was a sacred ritual. I spent hours making it from scratch, except I left one small detail deliberately off. I underbaked it, just slightly, so the middle would sink after it cooled, creating a soft collapse that would look perfect until the first slice was cut. Dinner went as expected. Jenna talked, Mom laughed, I smiled, and everything looked picture perfect until dessert was served. Jenna lit up when she saw the cake, said something like, "Wow, this looks amazing," and Mom clapped her hands together like a child at a magic show. I handed Jenna the knife, and she cut into it with ceremony, only to watch the slice fall apart on the plate, gooey and half-baked. There was a pause, just a beat too long. Then Jenna said, with a tight smile, "Well, it's the thought that counts," echoing Mom's exact words from the pie incident like a poisoned mirror. I met her eyes and smiled, slow and deliberate. "Exactly," I said, and then I excused myself to fetch more napkins. What followed was subtle chaos. Mom tried to smooth things over, saying the cake was rich and decadent. But her tone had that strained cheerfulness she uses when something's gone wrong, but she doesn't want to seem ungrateful. Jenna kept insisting it was fine, but her voice climbed an octave each time, and I could see the crack forming. This wasn't about the cake. It never was. It was about the fact that I'd out-hosted her, planned something warm and lovely, then delivered the exact kind of failure they'd never expect from someone like me, but in a way that no one could openly criticize without looking petty or paranoid. After they left, Jenna texted me from the driveway. "Was that supposed to be funny?" I didn't respond. She tried again. "Seriously, what the hell was that cake?" I waited another 10 minutes, then wrote back, "Just something I thought you'd like. Sorry if it didn't turn out perfect." It was the kind of reply that made her look ridiculous if she pushed it, and she knew it. That night, I went to bed smiling, not because I'd hurt her, but because I'd done something she couldn't undo. Planted the idea that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one capable of manipulating a narrative. The next day, Mom called me, her voice softer than usual. She said she hadn't stopped thinking about the dinner and how nice it was to be together. She mentioned Jenna seemed a bit on edge lately and asked if I'd noticed anything. I told her I wasn't sure, that I hadn't seen Jenna much outside of family things. Then I said, maybe she's just stressed from work, and left it at that. But in that silence after I spoke, I felt it, the shift. For the first time in my life, I was the one being trusted with quiet confidences about Jenna, not the other way around. And that kind of shift, that's not something you can fake or force. It's something you earn slowly, one cracked cake at a time. There's a moment that comes not like a thunderclap or a dramatic explosion, but more like a slow creeping leak behind the walls. A moment when the roles everyone's been playing so flawlessly start to fracture under the weight of their own absurdity, and the performance, long applauded and well rehearsed, begins to show its seams. For me, that moment happened on a Sunday afternoon. One of those cloud-heavy days where the air feels too still and every sound echoes a little louder than it should, like the world is holding its breath before something irreversible happens. I drove to Mom's house, invited by her this time, which in itself felt like a subtle acknowledgement that something between us had shifted. Less command, more request. When I walked in, I noticed immediately that Jenna's car wasn't in the driveway, and for a fleeting second, I felt that familiar pang of curiosity laced with guilt. Was she avoiding me, or was I being given space? Mom greeted me with a hug that lingered a beat too long, her hands slightly trembling, and I knew something had cracked open since the last time we'd spoken. She looked tired, not in the usual sense of age or physical exhaustion, but a deeper, soul-level weariness, the kind you wear behind your eyes when something long buried finally starts to stir. She made tea, the kind I brought her weeks ago, and I noticed she had arranged the tulips I gave her into a fresh vase on the kitchen counter, a small but undeniable sign that the past wasn't just haunting her, it was beginning to take up space again. We sat at the kitchen table, the one with the slightly uneven leg that wobbled if you leaned too far right. And for a while we just sipped our tea in silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, with all the things not being said, all the conversations we never dared to have when I was still playing the role of the forgettable daughter. Finally, she spoke, slowly, cautiously, as though testing the temperature of the words before she let them fall. She said Jenna had been distant lately, more irritable, quick to anger, and increasingly emotional. She asked me if I thought something was wrong, and before I could stop myself, I said, Maybe she's starting to realize being the favorite doesn't come with immunity. There was a pause, long enough for the words to hang in the air like fog, and Mom looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Half confusion, half recognition, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time, and didn't quite know what to make of it. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the small envelope I had been carrying for days. An unassuming thing, plain white, addressed simply, "For you." Inside were 5 letters, handwritten in blue ink, no dramatic declarations, no accusations, just memories. Small moments from my childhood that she may have forgotten, but that had stuck with me like thorns. Some were painful, like the time she missed my school play, because Jenna's gymnastics competition ran late. Others were quiet observations, like how she always cut my sandwiches differently than Jenna's, smaller, like I couldn't be trusted with the same portions. I didn't expect an apology, that wasn't the point. I just wanted her to know that I had been there all along, watching, remembering, and carrying it. She didn't open them while I was there. She held the envelope like it might burn her fingers, and then, just as I stood to leave, she reached for my hand, not to stop me, but to anchor herself. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I saw it. The guilt, raw and unfiltered. A recognition that perhaps the story she had always told herself about her daughters was not as neat or noble as she wanted to believe. She whispered, "I thought I was protecting you," and I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, but because of the sheer absurdity of that statement. Protecting me by erasing me. I didn't correct her, I just nodded and said, "I know," because sometimes the lie is all someone has left when the truth starts to feel like a betrayal. Later that evening, Jenna called. I could tell from her voice that she had been crying, though she tried to mask it with forced brightness. She wanted to talk about Mom, about how she'd been acting strange and withdrawn. She said she felt like something had shifted, like she was being pushed out of some sacred space she used to occupy without question. And then she said it. The thing I knew was coming, but still felt like a punch in the stomach. "Did you say something to her? Something to make her turn on me?" For a moment, I considered denying it outright, playing the innocent sister, but the truth hung between us like a loaded question neither of us really wanted to answer. So instead, I said, "I told her how I felt. That's all." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, in a voice sharp and brittle, Jenna snapped, "Well, whatever you said, she hasn't stopped crying since." She hung up before I could respond, and I stared at the phone, wondering if this was what victory felt like. Lonely, complicated, and soaked in consequences no one saw coming. That night, I lay in bed thinking about how easily people confuse love with favoritism, how long I had allowed their version of love to define my worth, and how liberating it was to finally step outside of that frame. But I also felt something else, something darker. I had changed the dynamic, yes. I had gained ground in a war I never asked to fight. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that something deeper, older, and more broken was beginning to rise to the surface. And that when it finally did, none of us would be the same. The house was quiet that Thursday evening, the kind of silence that blankets everything in a strange calm, not peaceful exactly, but more like the eye of a storm, where you know something still waits in the wings, unresolved, unfinished, and yet for now, eerily still. I had agreed to one last dinner, Mom's idea, a sort of awkward attempt to pull everything back together with the kind of forced normalcy only someone clinging to the edge of unraveling would think might actually work. It was a potluck, her term, which really meant she made the main dish and Jenna was bringing a salad, and I was expected to provide dessert, as though the last time I handled that hadn't resulted in a cake that became the metaphorical iceberg to Jenna's slowly sinking Titanic. I accepted without hesitation, but this time I didn't bake anything from scratch, didn't pull out my family's old recipes, didn't dig through Pinterest boards for the perfect blend of presentation and nostalgia. I bought a simple lemon tart from a small bakery near my office, the kind with a slightly burnt crust and just enough tartness to wake you up, and placed it in a plain box without any attempt at flair. There would be no symbolism tonight, just something honest, tangy even. When I arrived, Jenna was already there, her car parked slightly off-center in the driveway. A detail I noticed only because Jenna never parked imperfectly, unless something was bothering her. She was in the kitchen when I stepped inside, arranging the salad on a white porcelain platter like it mattered how the cucumbers were angled. Mom greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, soft but distracted, and I could tell her energy was scattered, her nerves running just under the surface of her polite smile. We made small talk, weather, work, that show she'd started watching, and it was fine, in the way that things are fine when everyone is trying very hard not to talk about the one thing that isn't. Dinner was edible, even pleasant. We passed dishes and exchanged careful words, each of us performing our parts like we were in some community theater production where no one had memorized the script. But everyone still hoped the audience wouldn't notice. It wasn't until dessert that the atmosphere began to shift. I brought out the lemon tart, sliced it cleanly, and placed a plate in front of each of them without comment. Jenna took a bite, then looked at me, not with anger, but with something closer to confusion, like she was trying to read between the lines and finding only white space. I gave nothing away. If she expected symbolism, she'd have to look elsewhere. Mom put down her fork and dabbed her lips, then folded her hands in front of her and said, "I read your letters." Just like that, no preamble, no segue. The words landed like a pebble in still water, quiet but rippling outward. I looked at her, met her gaze directly, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't brace for impact. She didn't cry, she didn't apologize. She just said, "I didn't know you remembered so much." I told her I didn't try to. It just stuck. She nodded slowly, the way people do when they realize they've been caught living in a version of the past that no longer matches anyone else's reality. Jenna shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable, and finally broke her silence with, "Why didn't you just talk to us instead of doing all this?" Her tone wasn't cruel, but it carried that edge of superiority she couldn't quite suppress, that deeply ingrained belief that she had always been entitled to the narrative. I leaned forward slightly and said, "Because I didn't trust that it would be heard. Not really, not without being spun or buried or turned into something about you." She looked stung, and for a moment, I thought she might fire back. But she just leaned back instead and stared at her half-eaten tart like it might offer her a better answer than I just had. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was warm, familiar, and trembling just enough to betray the calm she was pretending to hold on to. She said, "I loved you the whole time, Morgan. I just didn't know how to show it in the ways you needed." And those words, broke something in me, not because they were profound or perfect or healing, but because they were probably the truest thing she had ever said to me. I squeezed her hand, not in forgiveness exactly, but in acknowledgement. That would have to be enough. The dinner ended not with a bang, not with hugs or dramatic reconciliations, but with dishes cleared and lights dimmed and a soft goodbye at the door. Jenna and I didn't speak again that night. She walked to her car, back stiff, heels sharp against the concrete, and I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Later, walking home through the neighborhood just after twilight, I passed by the old elementary school, its swing gently in the wind, and I found myself stopping at the gate, resting my hand on the cool metal. I thought about all the things that would never be fully said, the apologies that came too late, the victories that tasted more like silence than triumph. I thought about how my mother had finally seen me, really seen me, and how Jenna now lived with the echo of that shift, and how neither of us would ever be quite the same. And as I stood there, wind pressing against my coat, the night settling in around me, I realized something that stopped me cold. Maybe the real revenge wasn't in the cake, or the letters, or even the unraveling of old roles. Maybe the real revenge was this, knowing I no longer needed to be anyone's version of it. Because I had stopped trying to earn a seat at a table where I was always expected to bring the dessert, but never allowed to eat in peace. I walked home in the dark, not triumphant, not broken, just still. And that, after a lifetime of noise, might have been the most powerful ending of all.